Hi, I'm Win, cycling instructor, and welcome to another episode of Practical Cycle Camping. I just picked this bike up. It's a 1994 Gary Fisher Advanced mountain bike, 20.5-inch frame. It's all chromalloy, probably straight gauge, because on Retro Bike, looking at the catalog, they talk about this being an all chromalloy frame, but nothing about being single or double or multi-butted. This bike has partially tapered front fork and a raison on the fork, so you can add a front fork to it. It's kind of in an odd location. It's not in the middle of the fork, it's far to the inside. So you'll need a large spacer, the length of the diameter, to come out. It has a raison in the back here, and so that means you can add a rear rack also. It seems like the tubing diameter is larger on this bike. It seems to be beefier, and it has what I think to be a chromalloy steel handlebar, chromalloy stem, aluminum alloy seat post, and the seat post is not stuck. It has a Dior LX front derailleur, and it has an XH LX rear derailleur, along with a BioPace triple chainring. It has a Gary Fisher front hub, a larger diameter, a 36 spoke front and rear, and these look like they're straight gauge. They feel like it. The front wheel holds air, the rear wheel has a flat in it, and the tire is in pretty sad shape. You can tell by this rack that it has a bend here, so it doesn't look like it's bent past the yield point, so I can probably bend this back. And it has a very goofy bend here, but these are short rack rails. It has the nicer Shimano cantilevers, and so I think with some servicing these would be good. And the shifter are not stuck. However, these are aftermarket Shimano 21 speed shifters, and so I might have some replacements to brake levers and shifters that bring this more back to where it was initially. It has ergo handlebar grips, however they're kind of gummy because this bike's been outside for a while. And of course it has bar ends, which I usually take off because it affects where you can place the shifter. The cables are all rusted, so these cables need to get replaced. But let's see how this bike works. It looks like it's got a nice thick coating of dried up oil on it. So the rear derailleur seems to work okay, and the front shifter works fine. So let's go through the rear shifter. Alright, and so now the shifter is starting to slip. So that means the ratcheting mechanism is a little on the dry side, needs to be serviced. Okay? But the first three shifts are good. So this one could be a pretty easy bike to service and bring into cycle camping use. It also includes a water bottle cage and a pump clip. Let's take a look at so the bottom bracket is a cup and cone. It's the bottom bracket, and so that can be serviced. And overall, I think this bike is in pretty good shape. For $10, it's a keeper. So let's see what we can do with this. So let's have another crack at this Gary Fisher Advance. And on the handlebar, it's got this really nice Gary Fisher bar on it. And I don't know if it's stainless steel or aluminum, but it is really nice looking. These bar ends are in pretty good shape. And what I could do is take some measurements of this and on the 3D printer, print some new bar end covers. These are somewhat gooey. I'm apprehensive about sealing it up, so I think I'll just buy some replacement grips and done with that. So this is another bio paste, just like on the Marin, and so I think I'll have to take this apart and to clean it up. It's pretty dirty. This is a cup and cone bottom bracket, just like the Marin, and so I'll need to take that apart to see how it is on the inside. This paint job is that splatter coat, so it's blue and it has some of this splattered white paint on it. And I don't know, you know, the product designers that come up with this goofiness, you know, you really have to question their intelligence, because when you have to touch this up, it's almost impossible to touch up, right? So this is all typical for water bottle cages. You know, they get beat up, and so, you know, you can scrub them up and then just repaint them whatever color you want, and that'll be good. Okay, so this is the rack. I took that off, clamped it up here with 2 pieces of wood, put it on the vise, and straightened it up, so it's better. And what I can do is, when I wash the bike, I'll wash this to masking tape, put some masking tape over the logo, and then, you know, paint it silver or whatever color I want. If I want it to be blue to match the bike, I can do that too. It's not a problem. Okay, I took off the rear tire because it was flat. The rim tape is gone, so when I wash the bike, we'll put on new rim tape, and then we can service the hub and chew up the wheel. This tire is destroyed, so we'll have to replace that. The handlebar stem was stuck in the steerer tube, and so to remove a handlebar stem, you release, use a 6mm wrench to release the steerer tube. Then you, with a hammer or a block, you pound down the screw. But if it's stuck, then you need to punch it out from down below. Instead of using a ratchet extension, just use a piece of rebar and a hammer, and you place this on a flat surface like a desktop or a tabletop. Push this underneath, and you can pound it or you can tap it out gently. It helps if you remove the lock nut for your headset and brush around that, and then you can see as you're tapping the handlebar stem pushing out, and as it pushes out, then brush it again to remove the rust, and continue repeating that until it's all the way out. Okay. And so the good thing is the handlebar stem doesn't go far, and it did eventually come out. So the seat post wasn't stuck, it moves around, but getting it all the way out was. Now this is the seat post diameter is sometimes stamped on the post itself, and I believe this one is, if I can find it again, it's 28.6mm diameter. This is on the tight side. I think the correct seat tube diameter would be 28.4mm in diameter. So the important point is, if you using grease in the seat tube, this is going to get stuck, and so I highly recommend you use an anti-seize lubricant that has metal particles embedded in it. This is from the auto parts shops from Permatech, anti-seize lubricant, and take a fair amount of this and spread it on the inside of the seat tube as well as on the seat post and push it down. And this is about as good as you're going to get to prevent to prevent the seat post from getting stuck in the future into the frame. This bottom, the crank was very difficult to remove on this, and so using your crank remover, make sure that you screw the remover all the way into the crank, and I needed to use a very long adjustable wrench to gain enough leverage to pull this out. Okay. The crank on this side was also torqued in a lot, and I had difficulty removing this also. But it did eventually come out. I have since brushed this area with a wire brush to remove the FOD and debris. So by manually turning this bottom bracket makes a lot of noise, so I know that it's dry. To get access to it, we need to loosen the lock ring, and I've got this Pedro's lock ring tool, and with a quick turn it releases, and then using a pin wrench, this one happens to be a green one from Park. You can use needle nose pliers also, and then unscrew the adjustable cup. It helps to have a container underneath this to catch the ball bearings when they do come out. This is spring loaded, so the wrench tends to stay in place. It also helps to do this on a table with a towel underneath, but in this case I've got paper towel underneath it. Let's remove this. Okay, take a look at the bearings. Bearings. I'll wipe these bearings up and we'll take a look at the whole bottom bracket. Okay. Alright, so this bottom bracket is shot. The spindle is a 7EL. I'm not sure if you can see it printed here, but looking here at where the ball bearing track is, there's scoring and pitting, and on the drive side there's a significant amount of pitting here, and so it's time to replace this. I'll measure this and see if there is a 7EL or a 7EL type bottom bracket available. Otherwise I'll need to replace it, and I'll probably put in a cartridge bracket as well. So yeah, this Gary Fisher Advanced is pretty worn out, requires a lot of work. Okay, this is the adjustable cup, and looking at this, the cup is worn out also. There's scoring and pitting there on the race. So I'll remove the fixed cup on the spike, and we'll just put in a cartridge bottom bracket. Okay, so I'll show you how I do that. This is the fixed cup of the bottom bracket using my headset wrench. This is a 36mm wrench, and you can unscrew it this way. However, this is a thin wrench and there's only 2 wrench flats here. It's not very easy because it's easy. The wrench will easily slip off this. So you need some way of holding this wrench in place while you're applying pressure. To do that, I have a little tool that I made, and it's just some pieces of wood and a long screw, and just put it in here like this, and what it does is it sandwiches the wrench in place. This doesn't have to be very tight, but just needs to be snug enough to prevent the wrench from popping out. Alright, and now you can apply pressure to it. Now this is on fairly tight, so you might not be able to generate enough force to take it out. However, using a small mallet, you can tap it out. Okay. Okay, so I loosened this. The camera wasn't turned on, but turning this clockwise, because in English threads it's tightened in the counterclockwise method, rotation. So using my hammer, I was able to loosen this so that now it works. Alright, so I'll work this off. And unscrew this. And then I can get a couple of measurements so I can order a replacement cartridge bottom bracket. So there are just two measurements I need. One is the length of the shell. That's a 72 millimeter, 73 millimeter shell. All right. And the other one is the length of the bottom bracket spindle. It's going to be 100 something. Oh, this one's a fairly long one. Looks like it's 127 millimeters. Okay, that makes it long enough so that the crank clears the chainstay. All right, so I'll look for that. I polished this with some baking soda and a damp rag, and it looks like the top tube is hopelessly sunburned, and so this paint here is faded. There's not much you can do with it. It looks nicer, but you know, I really can't help it. The rest of the paint looks reasonably good, and maybe tomorrow I'll remove the headset and do some servicing on that and see how that the condition of the bearings there. I put in some tape on the chainstay, and so that looks well, it's just electrical tape, so it looks good. And then after the headset, then we'll pull off the calipers on the brakes and give them some lube. I think by then the bottom bracket will have arrived, and so I can install that and then begin putting everything back together again. The lock nut here on the headset is a 40 millimeter, and I only have one headset wrench that's a 40 millimeter. The other one is down here. But if you put the wheel on the fork, you can clamp that between your legs and loosen this, and then that makes it doable with just one wrench. And once it's loosened, then the rest can be done by hand. So there's the nut, and then there is a keyed lock washer here, a keyed washer that has a key on it, because there's a groove on the back side of the steering tube that keeps it from turning. There is a bridge for your brake. Okay, so you're going to want to keep track of this. And incidentally, in this case, I've got a towel underneath this to catch any loose bearings that might fall out. I fully expect this headset to be worn out, since everything else on this bike is worn out. I would not be surprised if I have to replace the headset, or at the minimum the bearings. Alright, and I did squirt some oil in this when I first got this bike to loosen up the old grease. So let's pull this out and take a look at, see what we've got here. Alright, and this headset has, let me put this back the way it was, has a moisture seal here made of rubber or plastic. So this part usually doesn't wear out. Okay. And it has caged bearings, but you can tell by the color of the grease on this paper towel that it's holding a lot of dirt. Okay. And then here's your race, and you can see it looks very muddy. So let me wipe this out, and then we'll clean it, and I'll take a look at the races and see what that looks like. This is a cone, and let's look at this part that's in the bike are the races. The top stack usually in much better condition than the bottom stack. Let's pull off the bearings here. So in this case, on these bearings that are in a cage, the balls face inwards or towards the cup. For the bottom, okay, and there's a moisture seal here, so let's take that out and clean it up. It's very gunky. Okay. Okay. Let's get this mixture of ATF and some kerosene. Clean this up a little bit so we can see what we've got here. Having a little oil squirter with this 50-50 mixture of ATF and kerosene works pretty well. I'm happy with that. seal is very, very grimy. Oftentimes, what I'll do is, when the bottom stack is worn out, or if the bearings need to be replaced, I'll just move the bearings that are on the top stack to the bottom stack and then put new bearings in the top stack. Okay. Let's clean up the cup here. And so yeah, this is Gary Fisher Advanced bike. It might actually be an 89. I saw a reference to this paint scheme as a 90, but I just don't know if it is or not. So let's take a look at the condition of the cup on the inside here. And it's not scored, it's worn, but it's not scored. So that looks good. Let's take a look at the bearings. And yeah, these bearings look good. So I think the top stack looks pretty good too, and so do the top stack bearings. Alright, well, I think we lucked out. All I have to do is repack the bearings with grease and reassemble this, and we're good. Okay, so let me wipe this up and let's proceed to the reassembly. Okay, so put down a layer of grease on the cups. So bottom cup, top cup. Okay, we'll slide the seal in. Down a layer of grease here. Okay. Put down some grease on the top stack. Hunk of junk. Okay, let's put the seal in. Last chance to wipe off all the grease off your fingers, and let's screw it in. Easier said than done when your fingers are all covered with grease. Okay, I'm going to service the brake pivots on the cantilever brakes, and so I'll remove one of the cantilever screws, and this has a thrust washer that fits inside of this caliper. I'll look to see where this is located, and there's a pin in the middle slot. Okay, so when I clean this, I will place it in the uppermost slot. So let me clean this boss here with some half and half. Get a very small amount of grease. Put it on the pivot. We'll clean the inside here. Okay. Make sure everything is good here, and then slide this into the topmost hole. I generally work one brake caliper at a time. That way if something happens, I can take apart the second one and compare the two. Alright, so here's a thrust washer here. And this is located, this spring is located in the uppermost position. Okay, so something was going on there, but I found that, you know, if you pay attention to what you're doing, you can generally get these to work pretty well. In the uppermost position. Alright, and we'll screw this one back in again. Alright, that feels pretty good. Okay, let's pick up the frame here, and I'll turn it so that it faces the camera. Here, let me come up. So let's do the same. I'll release the straddle cable. And these brakes are pretty dirty too. This whole bike is well used. It looks like this came out of the middle adjustment hole. This model of Shimano cantilevers are pretty reliable, unlike the Altus, which is made of, has a plastic spring cover. The spring in this is embedded in the aluminum casting, so they're not likely to break. Okay, small amount of grease here on the bushing, and I'll position this in the uppermost spring position and screw this in. So you see, this doesn't take very much time, but it's just regular maintenance that needs to be performed. Okay. You can see this one is in the middle position too, so maybe it might be too tight. Okay. Clean that up here a little bit. Just a very small amount of grease on the bushing surface. Let's get the spring put back together again. Here it goes in the hole. The post comes out that hole. Okay. It helps not to get distracted where you're doing this. Okay. The tool that I'm using is a Park Y wrench. It's a hex wrench. It has it's a 4mm, 5mm, and a 6mm all combined. There are many manufacturers of this, so you can buy whatever one you want. This one is fairly old. Alright, so let's give this a try. Yeah, this is pretty tight. Well, we'll try this, and if it's too tight, then I'll move them back down to the middle hole spring pivot point. Okay, so now the brake surfacing is completed. My bottom bracket hasn't arrived yet, so but I'll continue on doing other tasks. Okay. While I've got the bike on the table, I can see that on the derailleur there's some caked up grease on the inside part of the derailleur cage. So using a wire brush, I'll brush that off, as well as the take up pulley. Okay, that looks good. When the replacement bottom bracket comes, I'll be putting in a cartridge bottom bracket, and this cable guide is held in with a Phillips screw, okay? But the screw protrudes through the shell here, right? And so that might, and it probably will interfere with the cartridge bottom bracket, and you're going to need to remove the screw and grind off enough threads so that the cartridge bottom bracket can go in, and then when you screw this in, it'll go in without interference, right? I'm going to service the Fisher Advanced wheel set, so with a wire brush I'm going to gently clean out the outside of the hub flange. I'll remove the quick release. Keep the conical washers in place so that they point inwards. I'll brush around the axles. Remove the FOD. Do this on both sides. Okay, so here's a 13mm hub spanner, and here's a 17mm wrench, and the wrench is on the left of the hub spanner, and so if I'm lucky I can squeeze this and loosen up the lock nut. Okay, there's a washer here, so let me remove that, and I'll push up on the axle from below, and this is very dry. Let me get some grease. Let me get some oil, and we'll squirt in a slug of oil here, and I'll screw in the cone. I'll flip it over while pushing up and holding the loose cone. We'll do it on the other side. Put in a healthy dose here. Give this a spin and see what you feel. And this feels pretty good. There's no tugging with the bearings, so I think everything is in pretty decent shape. Let's put the washer back on again. The overlock nut. so if you notice, I only remove one side. Right now this is on a little on the tight side. So you do want to have some pre-compression on the bearings. So screw this out a little bit. Feels good. And let's tighten up the overlock nut. And so now this time the overlock nut, the wrench will be on the right. And I can feel that there's some pre-compression on this. Feels good. There's no looseness. Very good. And so I'll just let this sit and let the oil dribble out, and then we'll clean up the mess. Okay, I'm looking for some writing or stamps, but it has a little decal here, but it's faded off. All right, so there's no writing on the hub, so I'll just put this skewer back in again with the conical springs facing inwards, and we'll lean it, put it in my garden, and let the oil drain. All right, here's the rear wheel. We'll do the same. Wire brush it to remove the debris. This has the cassette on it still, and we won't be taking the cassette off at this point in time. So same thing. We'll remove the skewer, capture both the conical springs, make sure they're facing inwards. I'll get a 15mm hub spanner. And attach the wrench to the left of the hub spanner and squeeze. There we go. Oh, that one was on tight. Okay, so here's a overlock nut. Here's a washer and a spacer. That's it. All right, so one large spacer, a thrust washer, and the overlock nut. Okay. This is pretty grimy, so let me brush this again, because I don't want what's on the outside getting into the bearings. All right, camera's still running, so let me loosen this. These bearings, of course, are very dry. We'll add twice the amount of oil to this because we want it to run through the hub out the other end. Okay, and let's put this back to reassemble this. So there's a spacer, the thrust washer. There's an inside and outside of this nut. The inside is flat, the outside is serrated or has knurls on it. Okay. Tighten this up. So the 15mm, put the wrench on the right of the spanner. Okay, let's put the wrench on this side, and I'll loosen this up a bit to get some of the pre-compression out. It's a little too much now. There's not enough. All right, so now we'll tighten this up a little bit more. Oh yeah, just right. Okay, and then let's tighten the overlock nut. We don't want it to come loose. Well, maybe I will take this cassette off because it's pretty grimy on the inside. Okay, let's put the skewer on, the conical springs pointing inwards. Let's give this a spin. That feels pretty good. Okay, and we'll let that lean on its side. All right. Front wheel looks pretty true. The dish is a little bit on the non-drive side, but not too much to be of too much of concern. It's out by maybe a 1/2 millimeter. So let's just take care of the small out of trueness here. So I've got the nipple wrench in my right hand and the needle nose, the pliers on my left to keep the spoke from twisting. And so I'll pull it to the drive side a little bit. So you work into the hump, and you work out of the hump. That spoke was pretty tight, so I'll take the non-drive side and loosen that a little bit. Okay, let's stress relieve the spokes. So we'll start at the drilling, and I'll squeeze the parallel pairs to make sure they get seated. You might have to do a couple of rotations on this, but it takes some practice. All right, let's fix that. Well, once you get a feel for this, it goes pretty fast. So maybe an 1/8 of a turn or a 1/4 turn each. That's all you really need to do. Alright, so try it again. Alright, this one's good. Nothing like having a nice, true wheel. Okay. So let's put this back on its side. Continue draining. Let's get the rear wheel. And we'll get that on the bike. Get that on the chewing stand. There we go. Okay. Looks like the dish is on this one is a little on the left also. This is about 2 millimeters. So let's see what we can do to bring it back in. Alright, so starting at the valve hole, I'm gonna give every spoke on the right side the same amount, a half a turn, and these spokes are pretty loose. That one's very loose. I'm not sure if I washed this wheel, but it's pretty dirty. So, bikes that are ridden a lot, the spokes loosen up. That spoke was pretty tight, so is this one. Okay, and that's the last one on that side. So let's bring in the feeler gauge. Oh yeah, this is perfect. Alright, so all we have to do is chew it up now. Alright, so here's the valve hole again. So let's go from here. And I can see the rim move as I tighten the spoke. Make sure you don't confuse yourself in which direction to tighten the spoke and which direction to loosen. Because after all, you are doing, could be doing both. That's one after another. All right, let's stress relieve the spokes. Alright. Got some oil on my hands. Alright. Where are we? Here we are. I'll definitely need to wash this wheel because I've got oil dripping on it now. Okay, let's bring in the feeler gauge a little bit. Bring it in closer. Alright, here's the valve hole. This is the rim tape that I typically use. It's the Schreiber rim tape, and this one is an 18mm. It's high pressure. The tape that I prefer is this fabric rim tape from Schreiber, and it comes in two sizes, a 15mm wide and a 19mm wide. And these are nice because it's fabric, but if you use tubeless, it probably won't work because of course it's porous, but I really like this. What I have also for Fix Your Bike Day, something that's less expensive, is this tape that looks like it's made out of mylar, and it wrinkles easily. It's a little more difficult to work with, but I'm going to try to use this on the Gary Fisher bike. When using this tape, you need to melt a hole in the rim tape so that the inner tube stem can go in. And so what I have is a battery powered soldering iron that I'll use to melt a hole. I mentioned that the wheel was still oily, so then I washed it again and removed the cassette and scrubbed it with a wire brush so that it looks a lot cleaner now. And I did that the same along with the front hub too, and so now the oil is off the hub, and that looks nice. So let's try putting some rim tape on this. The way I gauge the width of the rim tape is I just see what tape fits between the bead. This one is a little narrow. This one is about right, and I know off the bat it's going to wrinkle. Just try not to get too much of a wrinkle in it. All right, so I'll start at the valve hole, overlap a few inches, and just try to get the tape in the groove. And you really only want to have just one layer of rim tape on this. And so just work slow but deliberately, and press down so you can get the tape seated in the groove. I think this might be called the shoulder, right between the shoulder of the rim. And this tape doesn't stretch, so you just have to keep repositioning it to get it to cover the spoke nipples. Okay, the pressure from the inner tube will get the tape to seat in. Making sure that your rim is clean is helpful because there's often a lot of debris in there, and the rim tape is just going to capture it in place. All right, here we are, close to the end. So I'll overlap this a few inches, and then with scissors, snip that off. Okay. So let me heat up the soldering iron here. Once your soldering iron is heated up, from the inside, melt a hole through the valve hole. Now you've got an indicator so that you can come around from the outside of the rim and melt the rim tape so that your inner tube's valve stem can come through. All right? let's set this aside. And let's work on front rim. So right off the bat, I can tell you that the Schreiber tape is a lot easier to use to install than this rim tape. The reason why I bought this was because when I needed the rim tape for Fix Your Bike Day, the Schreiber tape was out of stock during COVID, where there was a lot of shortage. So we ended up buying 3 rolls of this, and I'm not sure if that was a very good idea, but we'll use it up and then switch back over to Schreiber. Okay. Modeling this is not. Okay, on this Gary Fisher handlebar, this is a chromoly bar that is black. However, over the years, the finish has been rubbed off, so now we've got this bare steel coating on it with an engraved company logo. I had a spare set of Diacomp brake levers, and Diacomp's a good brand, so I put those on. I didn't have a spare set of shifters, but from Fix Your Bike Day I did have these twist shifters that are from China, and these are 7-speed. Twist shifters are generally high reliability because there's only a small number of parts, something like 8, probably more on this, but it still looks good. So I've got a set of short grips coming, and then once that's in place, we can continue to go. I'm still waiting for the bottom bracket to arrive, but in the meantime, what I'll do is we'll install the brakes and get the tires installed. As for the seat post, this is a 28.6, which is fairly common size. 28.4 millimeter diameter is rare. I do have several 27.2 millimeter diameter seat posts for road bikes that are shorter. So for less than $4, I can buy a seat post shim. It's a sleeve that goes into the seat post that converts a 28.6 to a 27.2 millimeter diameter. And so that'll save a lot of problems because I don't need to find a special size seat post, and I can use one that I already have. Let me show you a method that I use to figure out the length of the right cable. So what I have is some of the older shift cable, and I know it routes from here to here. Okay, so this is the rear shifter. This is the boss for that, and by holding this in place, I'll rotate the handlebar just to make sure that there's enough cable housing that'll support the wrap. We don't want the cable housing to be so short that it'll tug on the cable. So I'll keep moving this out, and this looks pretty good. And so if we look at how this length works, it looks pretty nice because it comes out straight here and the cable exit will be straight here. So let me pinch this and I'll cut it to length. Now this is used cable housing, so I'm not going to actually use it, but I'm using this as a template. All right, and so if we put this on the other side for the front shifter, and we hold it in place, it'll work here as well. All right, so let me cut 2 pieces of this from new housing. Using the same piece of scrap cable housing, what I'll do is route the rear, and you want the cable housing exit to be relatively straight on the exit and on the entrance to the derailleur. You don't want it so long that you have an excess of loop, and you don't want it so short that you don't have a good bend radius. Okay, and so something like this looks pretty good. So let's do a practice cut on this piece of scrap cable housing. Put that in. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's cut a real piece for use. And here's the new piece of cable housing cut to length. And that's pretty good. Once I put the ferrules on it, it'll straighten it out a little bit. Okay, but that looks pretty good. So before I run the new these new cables through, I'm going to run some beeswax over the surface. And I found this works really well. Just 2 passes, 1 on each side is sufficient. Candle wax doesn't work, but beeswax is pretty good. And what it does is it acts as some lubricant as well as rust prevention. As far as cable housing is concerned, I generally don't reuse old cable housing on new cables because it's a source of a potential problem when you have shifting problems. Okay, so let's install one end, and what I have this is the compressionless cable housing for shifting. I have a 4mm ferrule that has a little tube on it, and another 4mm ferrule that does not. And so the end that does not, the traditional type, will fit into the barrel adjuster. And so the cable ends right now are welded, and so just look at the end that has the best opening to it, see if there's any printing on the cable. There isn't in this case, and so I'll feed this through. Okay. And then on this end, this is the ferrule that has a cable tube on it, and so I'll run this through and see if I can find the end to get it in. Oh, what timing! My neighbor is running his wood chipper. Okay, and so that's one, and push these in to make sure they seat. Otherwise, when it comes time to setting up your shifter, you're going to end up with all sorts of inaccuracies. Okay, and I'll run this through the cable guide down below, and back up. That cable guide might need to be removed when the bottom bracket comes, so for now, I'll just coil up this cable. Okay, this side has already been waxed also, and in my pocket I also have a plastic 4mm ferrule, so I'll put that in. I'll grab the other cable, look to see if there's any writing on it. If there is, I want the writing to be visible and correctly oriented. Find the hole and feed this through. And then on this end, I've got the 4mm ferrule with the cable end on it, with the tube, and try to fish this through. If you don't have one of these, don't worry, just use a regular 4mm and that'll work. But what I found this tube does is it acts as a moisture barrier for when you wash your bike. The water doesn't run through the cable housing and then get rusted. Okay, so make sure these are all seated tightly, and then screw in your adjuster, and we'll run this through and route this cable through the adjuster, through the cable guide, and then on this end I'll get another 4mm ferrule, as well as a 4mm with a tube on it, and I keep these in little plastic pill bottles. And the child-proof clip I just cut off. Okay. So then on this side, I'll feed in this ferrule from the reverse direction because it's going to be facing inwards, like this. And I'll get the new cable. And this side is good, so I don't need to try to force it open. Push these two together really well, and then sometimes these holes aren't opened enough, so you need to work your way through it. Okay, and seat that in. Okay, and then we'll put this in here, and we'll feed this through here. And make sure this barrel adjuster is screwed in all the way also. And you can see that you might not be able to see from here, but the ferrule straightens out the cable quite a bit. And we'll just coil this up also because that goes through the cable guide that might need to get removed to cut down the length of the screw so the bottom bracket can get in. Okay, the next step is we'll install the brake cables and the cable housing for that. Okay, here's another piece of scrap cable housing, and so dry fitting the rear brake housing in its boss and holding it and then rotating it, I can see that the cable isn't going to stretch. It's tight, but it's fine. Okay, so we'll use this for as a sample to cut, and maybe I'll add 5mm to this just in case. So let me do that now. This is 5mm cable housing that I just cut. It's the coiled type, and it must be coiled for use with brake cables. When you cut this, oftentimes the coiled housing, the metal gets twisted, and so that needs to get straightened out, and it's brittle. So generally after you bend it once, it'll break off. You do that on both sides so that you don't have a burr inside the cable. And then you need to get a flat file and file the rough edges away. And use a full stroke on your file so that the whole file gets used. Otherwise you'll just have a worn out spot in the middle. It's a matter of economics. Okay, so a sign of a well-trained bicycle mechanic or machinist will always use the full stroke of a file. A person that doesn't, well, they're just not learned, and generally would not be a good practice to loan them any tools because they're going to mistreat it. Okay, and so I'll use the tip of my screwdriver here to try to open up the end if I can. If I can't, then I'll try the other side. There we go. That's good. All right, I just need one end opened up. And here I have a 5mm plastic ferrule or metal ferrules. I have both. And well, let's just use metal on the brakes. And these have a large opening So I'll feed one in, and I'll put the other in my pocket because I need to get some brake cables. Okay, so I have the cable installed, and I have the ferrules installed on the cable, and I'll run this through to the brake boss here on the frame, and then I'll run it through back here, which has a noodle, and I could very easily just run it through, but if I have a piece of hose, I could sleeve this to reduce the friction. So let me go see if I've got one. Okay, so here's a piece of tubing. You can get this at the bike shop. For bicycles that have internally routed cables, sometimes these are installed in the frame so that the mechanic, when they assemble this, can run the line and then remove this. So ask them if they have it, and it should be for free. So at any rate, I'll run a small piece through here, and it should be a little bit on the long side, so I'll cut that off. So when I did some assembly for pre-production bikes for a major bike company here, they threw this stuff away all the time, and I recognized the value of it, and so I kept a lot. Here we go. There. Now this has a sleeve to it, and we're ready to attach the transverse hanger here. Okay, using a 9mm wrench and my adjustable wrench, let me loosen this up here. Now it's kind of rare having a combination wrench that's a 9 and a 10mm. This came out of a tool. As a matter of fact, this is a 10mm here. That's right. Okay. But it's still a 9mm and a 10mm wrench. Okay, so out this comes. Okay. And this binder screw has a hole in it. So I'll fish that through. Make sure it clears the straddle cable. And I'll finger tighten this a little bit just so that the hardware doesn't fall apart. The screw has some flat spots to it so that you actually don't need 2 wrenches. All right. But I'll just make that a little better than finger tight. Okay. So in this case, let's see if I can spin this around so that doesn't look like it's backwards. It should be like this. All right, there we go. That way the hanger is open in the direction that's facing you. All right, and then I can pull out some of the slack here by hand, loosening this. All right, and that's, for now, that's good enough. Okay, and then we can install the brake blocks and then bring this cable in shorter. Okay, so we have a cable hanger for the front here, and so the cable routing, the cable length would go from this hanger to the brake lever, and ideally the front cable will be in front of the rear cable. Okay, but the entrance should be a straight shot. So we'll just approximate it where my thumb is, and I'll cut a piece of cable that long. Okay, same thing here. I need to use my needle nose pliers and take this middle housing the coil housing that's been crimped, and pull it away because it's bent over. then get a file and file it flat using full strokes of your file. And you could use a cross-cut file or a single cut file. It doesn't matter, but just use full strokes. Okay. Now in this case, I'm going to use two 5mm ferrules again. I'll use two metal ones so that they match. So I'll feed the first ferrule in, going in, and inspect the ends of the cable and find one that works. And this is a 5mm cable housing for brakes. And I'll put in this housing here. Okay, now we're ready to feed this through the brake hanger housing here. So let me find the end and fish that through. Okay, and then figure out the routing of this. Alright, so let's see. This is the rear, these are the front. Alright, so we don't want to have we want to make it look organized and thought out. There we go, like that. Okay, and let me find the brake hanger here. This one looks like it's a 9mm. Yeah, it is. Right. So let me remove the old cable piece here. And if there are frayed ends to this, be somewhat careful that you don't impale yourself with that in your haste. Alright. And so in this case, we want the hanger, open part of the hanger facing forward so that you can easily service it again. And then there's a hole here. So there's the head of the screw, a washer, the hole. Okay. And so the cable is sandwiched between the anchor plate and a washer. All right, we'll just make this finger tight, and then I'll coil up the cable for now. Okay. Incidentally, on brake cable housing, if the housing is still in good shape and the internal sleeve is in good shape, I don't see any problem reusing that, because it doesn't affect anything. It's the shifting that you don't want to reuse, because when you have index shifting, a small amount of friction will cause sluggishness when you go from a lower gear to a higher speed gear, or going from the easy gear to a harder gear. And so to eliminate that source of frustration, whether it's the cable or the housing, use new on both. If you notice, I don't have any brake pads here, but then there's no tension on the brake cable, but the straddle cable is in contact with the rear wheel. Okay, and so what that should tell you is that if you're riding and this brake cable breaks, then the straddle cable will come in contact with the tire, and the tire is going to either make noise or it's going to stop turning. For example, if this were a knobby tire, this cable could probably stop the wheel and you're going to skid and crash. One way to act as a safeguard to it is if you had a reflector bracket, it might be good to install the reflector bracket just as an arm that sticks out, so that if the cable does break, it will rest on the cable bracket instead of on the top of the tire. And this is especially important for the front wheel. I used a wire brush to clean up the inside of the bottom bracket shell so that I can see the number of threads that are exposed from the screw that holds the cable guide in place, and there are 5 threads exposed, and so I figure that if I cut off at least 4 of the threads using a hacksaw, putting the screw in my vise, then I should be able to get the replacement bottom bracket to screw in without interference. So I'm going to do that now. So this is the screw after I had cut it down with the hacksaw. After you cut it, use a file to square it up. And I held the head in the vise. And then I used the full blade of the hacksaw to cut through it square. You could also use a series of washers or a nut to use up the space. When I remove the screw, you can see what part was exposed because it was rusted. So I cut off 4 and there's still 2 threads exposed, but I think that'll clear. Okay? So that's 3 ways you can do this. You can cut it, stack it up with washers, or screw a metric nut on it. Right, and this is a good fit. You can see the screw is installed and it doesn't exceed into the shell. So this should be a good fit. I'll add some grease to the inner threads here and then install the bottom bracket. This bottom bracket arrived today. It's a 73mm shell with 126mm width. It looks like this. And it has some nice crank bolts. Uses 2 industrial cartridge bearings with a steel shell with a square taper spindle. Okay, and so it has a left and a right, which makes it easy. I'll use this is my first toolkit I bought, and when I was learning to become learn bicycle mechanics, it includes a lot of the basic tools, and I highly recommend this. It also included a bottom bracket installation spline tool that fits this shell very well. And so what I'll do is I'll use this, and you can get an idea of how I do it. Okay, I'm screwing in the adjustable part of the bottom bracket in first because sometimes it interferes with the bottom bracket itself. So I at least want to get this, make sure that this is started and threads in, because sometimes it doesn't, it won't go in because the bottom bracket body is already in there. So this is started, and I'm going to switch to the front, to the drive side. Alright, so now I'm at the drive side, and threads of the bottom bracket have been lubed with grease, and so I'm going to tighten this in, going counterclockwise. I'm going in reverse to find the start of the thread so it doesn't cross thread, and then I'll thread this in. I'm running low on battery power, so I need to try to get this thing going. Okay, once this is seated, then I'll switch to the other side and screw this in as well. And once all the way seated, then I can use the wrench handle to torque it down. Okay, and I'm going to stop here because my camera's going to shut off. Alright, so that's all the way in. This is pretty good. Okay, tighten by going counterclockwise on the drive side. Alright, to get the cranks installed, we'll put some grease on the tapers of the spindle. And I'll push on one of the cranks and hit it once. And now we can put in the crank bolt. And we wrap it so that the crank seats onto the square taper. Okay. Here we go. And then we'll ride this for a week and then check the torque setting on this. And the square taper is lubed with some grease, and so I'll get the bottom bracket and the crank and fit that on so that they're opposed. Okay, I've got my block of wood and my hammer, and I'll smack it once. Here's the crank bolt and my hex wrench, and we'll screw this in. The chain that I'm using is a chain that I already have sitting in my stock. It's not a new chain, but it's still in good condition, so it's not worn out. Okay, there we go. And now we've got the bottom bracket installed. Okay. Before we adjust the derailleur, we need to make sure that the cable housing is seated in all the fittings, as well as the cable is stretched a little bit. To do that, what I do is I'll manually shift into the lowest gear by pushing into the derailleur. Make sure that all of my fittings are screwed in, the barrel adjusters are screwed in all the way, and then loosen the pinch bolt and then pull this, right? And then I'll pedal, and the gear is, the chain will drop to some gear, and then I'll use the shifter and shift it back up to the lowest gear. And so that puts the maximum amount of stress on the cable. And then I'll slightly pull the cable in various locations along the bike to make sure that these fittings seat properly. Because if they're not seated properly, then if we were to adjust the derailleur, as soon as we start using it, it's going to go out of adjustment again. And so to prevent that, we want to make sure that all the parts are fit properly. We do the same thing with the front derailleur. What I'll do is I'll manually shift the derailleur into the largest chain ring, okay, and then I'll loosen the cable, in this case with an Allen bolt, with an Allen wrench, and I'll pull it so that it's tight, and then tighten it back up again. I'll pedal a little bit, and then the chain is going to take up the slack and it'll drop. Then I'll twist the shifter back into the highest gear, and that'll put the maximum amount of stress on the cable. And then I'll pull on the cable in various locations and wiggle the cables to make sure that they fit properly. They're properly seated in their position. And I'll do this for a little bit and then let it sit. And then after about 5 minutes, I can come back and we can do a front and rear derailleur adjustment. All right, it's been about 10 minutes. And so to adjust this derailleur, what I'll do is on the shifter, I'll shift to the highest speed gear, which is your outermost gear. I'm going to pinch the cable with one hand and loosen the pinch bolt with the other. All right. Now I'm going to pedal a little bit, and I'm going to watch the derailleur drop down, and then when it's into the outermost gear, I'm going to tighten this up. If this is done properly, now when I shift using the rear derailleur, it goes up to one gear, up to the next, again, Alright, and that's pretty much set to factory specs. Okay, there could be some minor modifications, adjustments to this, but this is pretty close to perfect. Yeah, this is good. You apply some load to it, and that's how you get. Okay, so right now the derailleurs in the outermost gear were shifted into the lowest gear. I've released the cable, I'm pinching the cable, and we'll wait for it to feed through and drop to the lowest gear. I'll stop the wheel, and then I'll tighten up the bolt. So this is the minimum amount of slack needed to shift into the lowest gear. Okay? And let's shift to the highest gear, and that's pretty good. Okay, and then we have good shifting to low. Okay, so we're good with the derailleurs now. We can move on. What you want is an M5 tap with a 0.7 millimeter thread pitch and a handle. These are not expensive, you can buy them online, but it's important to, especially on older bikes that have been stored outside, to clean out the tap. It's important to clean out the threads, and you do that by retapping the threads so that all the rust and debris is removed, because the 5mm screws that go into this are not very strong, and should you try to put a screw in a rusted hole, there you have a good chance of that screw to snap off, and then you're going to have another problem of trying to remove that screw, because you're going to need a reverse twist 3mm or 4mm drill to extract that. So to prevent that, just take some time and run a tap through the threads. This is what the tap looks like when you're running it through the eyelet, and you can see that the flutes are full of debris, and this is typical. I've done this on 6 eyelets already, and most of them look like this after I clean it out. Okay, so I have it started, and now it's going through, and you can see the flutes are pretty full of stuff. So I'll just run it through as far as I can. Alright, and now I'll back it out. I'll install the pedals, and if you look here, what I did is I took a small drill and drilled a hole in the cap of the end of the pedal axle, and that allows me to go in there and squirt some oil without having to take off the cap, because a lot of times with these cheap plastic pedals, you remove the cap falls off, and so it's best just to drill a little hole and oil the bearings this way. If you are concerned, you can cover it with some hot melt glue. To install the pedals, you have a left and a right side, and on this pedal it has a 6mm Allen head, and this one has some crosses on it which would indicate the letter L, so this would be the left side, and the right side does not. Sometimes it has a stamp on it like an R, and this one has an R on it, and this side has an L. Okay, so to do this, using an Allen wrench, I usually put it through the the hole and then guide it through, and then screw it in going forwards. Okay, and so this collides with the chain ring, so I'll just tighten that up. And these don't need to be very tight, but just tight enough so that they're not going to fall out. Okay, so again, I'll put the wrench through this and then screw this forward. If I was using a pedal wrench, then to install this faster using a pedal wrench, I would pedal backwards and that would self-tighten. And likewise, if I wanted to remove the pedals, then I would, with a pedal wrench, I would pedal forwards. Okay. And make sure they're well seated, and then that's good. I'm scheduled to teach a cycling class this Sunday, so I'm thinking, well, if the parts all come in, I can use this bike to teach with. So I need to put on a bottle, water bottle cage, and a pump. And so I've got a set that I've been using on all of these video bikes. And so I've got some 5mm screws here with they're cap screws. And so I just put some beeswax on it. This is a nylon specialized water bottle cage and a pretty reliable Zeffel pump. It's a telescoping type, and it supports both Presta and Schrader valves, so it works out really well for me. So I'll see if I can get this screw started by hand here. There we go, and I'll get this one in there, and I only need one water bottle cage. The ride from my house to the class is about 15 miles, so it's not far. I don't need to drive, but I do need to carry a lot of supplies like a first aid kit and drill material and chalk and a full set of tools, not a multi-kit. You never know what kind of bike is going to have a problem in these classes, so bring regular tools. So hopefully all the parts will come in and I can use this on Sunday. So today is Thursday, so keep our fingers crossed. Okay. From the inside, I'm going to screw in a 20mm cap screw. I think an 18 would be better, but I'm running low on 18mm length screws, so I'll use this 20. And this is inserted from the inside out. And the reason why is so that when the screw does break off, that you can still remove it. Okay, and then I'm going to insert 5mm nut over that. Okay, and then I can tighten that down snug. And this is the rack that came with the bike. I straightened it out, like I said, on a vise. I painted it, and then I flattened out the rails too. So what we'll do is on this side I'll install it, and I'll put a flat washer on it. Okay, so let me install a flat washer here and 10mm nut over that. Get my 9mm wrench and we'll snug that up. Alright, so a 20mm, which actually is just right, goes through the eyelet, backed by a nut. We have the rack, a flat washer, and then another nut. Yeah, and 20 millimeters is just right. Okay. Here on the top, it looks like it fits best from the inside. So what I'll do is I'll get another 20 millimeter screw, I'll put some wax in it, run it through, and we'll connect it from the inside. Okay? Okay, so to install it, I've got some beeswax, and I'll scrape on a couple of strokes of wax on the threads, and I'll screw it in on each side. Okay, I've got two 20 millimeter screws, and I'll screw it in each from the outside inwards. And so we'll have a fair amount of posts sticking through it that the rail can attach to. Wrench, which fits this particular screw, and I'll snug it up. The rails are not tight yet, but I'll get one in first. Insert a flat washer. I've got a couple of keeper nuts here. You could use regular nuts. This is just was in my bag. There's not a lot of force on these screws, so in previous videos I said, well, let's back this with a nut first, but it's really not necessary because this is just for lateral movement forward and backwards. Okay, let me install another washer here. And sometimes you can't see where you're working, so it's just all by feel. And then we'll hand tighten this. This is just tight enough so that it's not going to fall off when I move it, because I'll adjust the rails and the flatness of this rack when it's on the ground using a bubble level. So let's go back to the rear of the bike. Okay, so what I want to do is we'll put in a screw from the outside in. Ideally it's in from the inside out, but I don't have a flat screw, I just have a cap screw. And so this is an 18 millimeter long screw, but to get the stack up to work properly, I'll also need to use a lock washer, and that'll make it so that there's no threads exposed on the other side. And so to do this, what I'll do is put the screw in to the rack. Alright, and then I'll put the washer and the nut on loosely. Alright, and screw this in by hand. Okay, and then let me get this into place with the braze on here on the eyelet, and try to get this started. Here we go. So now there's the screw, the rack, a washer, a nut, and then it goes into the eyelet. Right, then I'll tighten this down. Okay, so if this screw were to break, it will break off here at the head, and that will still leave a nut there that you can remove, and then with a pair of pliers remove the broken part of the screw. Okay, and that'll save you a lot of time. With the bike on level ground, get a carpenter's level and put it on the rack, and then adjust it so that it's level. And the bubble is between the two marks. Make a couple tries. Alright, that's good. Okay, so we can tighten everything up and we'll be ready to use this. Right, and the seat post shim came in. This is a Tupre 27.2 to 28.6 millimeter diameter. And so install that, I'll apply some grease on both the inside and the outside. Okay, and we'll slide it in with a slot in the back matching the existing seat post. Okay, and so it's a 28.6 to 27.2 millimeter diameter, and I took the half round crosscut file, ran it up and down the seat tube to clear out all the rust and debris to open up that diameter, and then I put in the seat post shim and then the suspension seat post, and it works pretty well. I also have a 27.2 millimeter diameter alloy seat post that I can put in this when I decide it's time to sell this bike. Okay. A few days ago, the ergo grips finally arrived. These are the short ones, and so I installed those. I applied a little bit of hand sanitizer, which is ethyl alcohol or ethanol, to the inside using an eyedropper, and rolled it around and then slid it right on. When it dries, then it will not slip. This one doesn't use any clamps, and so alright, that's okay. And then I have a couple of strips of inner tube material that I can use as a brake lock by pulling the strap out and putting it over the brake lever, and that will put enough force on it to lock up the rear or front wheel. So I have it on both. Right, so that looks good. Last Saturday I used this bike to ride the Niles roll and stroll up the canyon road, and perform bike sag with that after spending some time tabling at Bike Fremont. And this Saturday I'll be going down to Cupertino to be a ride chaperone for the long ride for Cupertino's Bike Fest, and I'll be doing that along with ex-mayor Steve Scharf. And so that's around a 10-mile ride. It's relatively short, and so I'll ride this bike along with carrying a load of tools and parts and things just in case the participants have bike failure or bike problems. There is a load of 20 liters of soft drinks on this bike, which is 44 pounds. In the forward panniers, there's two 2-liter containers each. So that's four containers. And in the back, there are 3 containers in each, for a total of 6. And so I have smaller panniers in the front, larger panniers in the back. And this bike handles pretty well. It's what you would expect for a fully loaded touring bike. The rear panniers are the J&D, and I don't have the original clips on them. I've installed aftermarket polycarbonate adjustable clamps that release when you pull up on the lever, or you pull up on the handle and it releases the lever, allows it to come off. And these are polycarbonate. They're pretty strong. They're adjustable for the spacing, which makes them ideal. About as good as you're going to get. The lower hook strap is still the same. I installed a tail light, and this is uses yellow or amber LEDs, which is preferred because they're more recognizable. Okay, I've got a under the saddlebag with a spare tube, using the water bottle cage with a bottle. I've got a Garmin GPS, rechargeable small indicator light, and a bell. Okay, The front brakes, I just ended up taking them off my touring bike and put them on this. So this bike, of course, uses road bike brake pads, and the kind that has a screw with a conical disc on the inside. Okay, I put the washer that was on the outside on the inside so that there was a better fit. Okay, that's the same for front and rear. I think that's the BRM 454 brake pad. And so the ones that are coming, I guess I'll put on my touring bike, and that's for the Shimano and Tiagra, but any other road bike pad like that will work just fine. So on each pannier I have a list, because I can always have difficulty figuring out what I've got packed. And so, for example, on one, these are just written in cardboard. I have a list of what's inside in the top packet in the main compartment. Same for on the non-drive side. I have a list of what's on top, what's in the main compartment. I may or may not use this, but it's generally, I pack it always the same. So for example, on the non-drive side rear, this is what I carry. Okay. And then on the drive side rear, it looks like this. And this is just a piece of cardboard that I staple on to the outside pocket. Yeah, it seems kind of funny, but it sure saves me a lot of time. So with that, I'll leave the video, and happy cycling, and maybe I'll see you cycle camping sometime.